Hello, we're back. I never know what to say at the start of a YouTube video, and it always feels really awkward. So, hi, I'm me, and yes. I appreciate all the comments that you've been leaving and how constructive they've been. I've been learning just as much from your comments as I have been from just trying to understand everything for myself from what I've been reading, so please keep them coming. You're teaching a Pathfinder newbie and you're helping out the video, which is a win for us all. The next entry into the series is this, and it is going to be 2 or 3 parts. The first part is going to be just the basic dwarf details and mechanics and the heritages. The next part into the series is going to be dwarven feats, and there's a lot of those. So I'm hoping that I can fit it into one bite-sized big bite. It's a big bite. I'm hoping I can fit it into one video. I don't think that I can though, so I'm tentatively saying that it's going to be 2 parts. But, you know, we'll see. Just for reference, in this video and the coming video on dwarves, I am going to be using 2 source books, the core rulebook and the character guide. There's no real rhyme or reason to this, except I thought the character guide was the equivalent to the player's handbook. And so when I started looking at things, I realized that they weren't, because the core rulebook seems to be the equivalent to the player's handbook, and that has more of the basic stuff in it. So after I looked at everything from the character guide, I also looked at stuff from the core rulebook, so I'm just gonna do them both. Also, like, one last thing before we jump in, subscribing is super cool, and it'll give you a plus 11 circumstance roll on your next game, probably, maybe, like, show it to your DM, I don't know what they're gonna say, but you got my permission for it, okay? Just a free plus 11. I don't know how that fucks with the game, I don't care, but you should subscribe and try it out. See what happens. Let me know. Okay, we go. Bye-bye. Love you. Okay, bye. Dwarf mechanics. So I'm gonna be skipping most of the flavor stuff in this section. I'm a homebrew world builder, and I use a lot of what exists within this section as inspiration for what I create. And for the most part, it doesn't really mean too much to me. It seems very specific to Galarian, and that's cool and that's great, but I'm more interested in the mechanics, and then eventually I'll use that flavor to make my own world with a little bit of a Pathfinder blanket wrapped all over it. So let's just go. We're going. Okay, bye. Hit points. 10. Alright, so HP. Probably one of the coolest things that I knew about before going into this. Race and class both give you HP. I think maybe even background might zhuzh it up a little bit and give you something a little bit extra based on some of the things that I've seen. The fact that you get a starting pool from your race and your class is mind-blowing to me. I don't understand how any DM doesn't TPK every one of their fucking players at level 1. I don't understand it, okay? You have a dagger. A dagger deals 1d4. That means that you could deal 4 damage to a player at any given moment, okay? And that's without modifiers. You have a fucking goblin with a +2, a max roll 1 hits a fucking wizard with no constitution. Now, take into consideration that some low CR monsters have a fucking longsword. You take a longsword, you put that bitch in 2 hands, that's 1d10 plus some strength. That's not, I should not, okay. But that's a lot. That's a whole bunch. 1d10 plus 2, 10 plus 2 is 12. You can one-hit a player. You can kill a wizard with one singular roll. Not down it, not knock it out. It's dead. That's a dead wizard 10 minutes into your first combat. I don't like low-level combat, so the fact that fucking Pathfinder gives you 2 health pools, genius. Speed, 20 feet. Speed being 20 feet is weird. I'm hoping that speed also works the same way that health does, and that you get more speed somewhere else, because if you only get 20 feet as a dwarf, holy fucking shit, that's ridiculous. I don't like it at all. Because even 25 feet as a dwarf, when you have people in your party that are rocking 30, 40, 45, whatever, you're slow as fuck. And this is slower. This is basically fucking difficult terrain for most creatures. Okay, I don't like it. I'm not a fan. Ability boosts. Constitution. Wisdom. Free. As for the ability boosts, I think the way that Pathfinder does character creation in regards to ability boosts is super cool. One thing I don't understand is whether or not all of these ability boosts are +1 or +2. I'm assuming they're +2. Either way, it makes things a little bit more important for what you're picking rather than just randomly rolling dice. However, I do like the idea of rolling dice more just because I like rolling dice. I bought pretty dice. I have pretty dice. Let me use the dice, you bitch. One of the things that I really don't like is how restrictive it is. My favorite thing that D&D has done in the last few years that I have been playing it is what Tasha's brought to the table, allowing you to just take the ability scores and put them wherever the fuck you want. I don't like that if I want to play a character that needs good charisma, I can't play a dwarf to get the stats that I really want. I want to just be able to pick what I want and put it where I want. And I'm sure that there's probably some options or homebrew room for that to happen within the rules of Pathfinder, but I think it's just better to do that. Although in the inverse, I also have come up with really cool characters where I had something specific in mind. There was Asher the Paladin, who was meant to be a dwarven paladin, but because dwarves don't get the charisma bonuses that I wanted, I wound up making him a tiefling that was actually just born to dwarves. I fucking ham-fisted the necessary boosts by way of race into the backstory, and I thought it was one of my better backstories that I've created. I wanted to play a fucking dwarf, and I couldn't, and, well, I could, but I'm also a slut for stats, okay? I like to have my stats where I want them. Fuck you. Ability flaws. Charisma. Ability flaws are also cool, though I think I heard that they're optional, maybe, I'm not sure. Assuming that all of your base stats start out at 10 and everything that you pick only therefore increases them, makes for a really average character. The only way to get those flaws is to take ability flaws, so it would be weird for them to be optional and not taken, but I think even as an average character, you can still have those moments where you're flawed. But I think that having actual ability flaws really sort of hammer in that potential. I've never played a character with a 6 in any stat, but I'd really like to. My rogue right now has an 8 in strength, and it's never really been super important. I don't really put myself in a lot of situations that rely on me being strong, but we did use variant encumbrance for a large portion of the campaign, and only being able to carry 40 pounds can go fuck itself. Languages. Common. Dwarven. Additional languages equal to your intelligence modifier if it's positive. One of my favorite things that Pathfinder does is the way that it handles languages. You have a number of languages equal to your intelligence modifier, and I think that that's genius. I like that the ability modifiers are inherent to your character in ways other than just static scores. The fact that you get an amount of languages equal to your ability modifier makes it seem like your intelligence is actually being used for something intrinsic to your character. I love that, and I hope that there's more to it. Like maybe you get more proficiencies based off of your intelligence modifier or something along those lines as well. Dark vision. You can see in darkness and dim light just as well as you can see in bright light, though your vision in darkness is in black and white. Dark vision doesn't have a range, and that's curious. I don't understand how that works map-wise, but also I like it because yes. But also, I'm not a huge fan of dark vision in general as a virtual tabletop player, because anytime someone doesn't have dark vision, I basically have to fudge it a little bit so that they're not just staring at darkness for the entire fucking time. Clan Dagger. You get one clan dagger of your clan for free, as it was given to you at birth. Selling this dagger is a terrible taboo and earns you the disdain of other dwarves. The clan dagger's really a curious background item in my opinion. I mean, it feels like that anyway. It's very interesting in a confusing sort of way. I like the flavor that it imbues within dwarves and having this item that has a lot of sway one way or another, but the fact that you just get a dagger and that it's super important seems weird to me. But again, I'm comparing this to 5th edition, and there's no 5th edition race that's just basically like, you get a dagger, it's a cool dagger, it's an important dagger, the end. But I haven't super looked into the clan dagger just yet. I haven't really looked into some of the weapons yet, but I have seen some things on critical specializations, and I find that to be super interesting. So I'm curious to see how this dagger plays an effect. I think as a DM, barring what I learn as I do a deep dive into weapons, I might make the clan dagger not always a dagger for my players. Maybe it's a clan short sword, maybe it's it's a clan longsword, maybe it's just a clan dwarven weapon in general. I am approaching this from the perspective of 5th edition brain, where Dagger is mainly just a weapon used by rogues. It's the rogue's bread and butter outside of a rapier or a longbow. So from my mind of an ignorant Pathfinder person, Dagger seems rogue adjacent, and dwarves aren't typically my first choice for a roguish character. Having something like that so tied to my dwarf feels like it would only be super important as a rogue. Heritages. Ancient Blooded Dwarf. Dwarven heroes of old could shrug off their enemies' magic, and some of that resistance manifests in you. You gain the Call on Ancient Blood reaction. Call on Ancient Blood. Trigger. You attempt a saving throw against a magical effect, but you haven't rolled yet. Your ancestors' innate resistance to magic surges, before slowly ebbing down. You gain a +1 circumstance bonus until the end of this turn. This bonus also applies to the triggering save. I'm reminded of Dragon Age Dwarves, and I love it. As for a trigger, I'm a little curious at what that means. I'm assuming it just means whenever X happens, trigger Y, and it doesn't cost anything in the action economy. So every time you attempt a saving throw against a magical effect but haven't rolled yet, the ability just happens endlessly. There's no limit, there's no long rest, short rest, cooldown, it just happens. At least I hope that's what it means. Otherwise, I assume trigger is kind of like a reaction, and you only get those once per turn. Anvil Dwarf. You are a descendant of a famed crafter and have your own amazing talent. Other dwarves might consider this a blessing from your ancestors or from the Forge Father himself, depending on where you grew up. You become trained in crafting, or another skill if you were already trained in crafting, and gain the specialty crafting skill feat, but you can pick 2 different specialties instead of 1. I forgot the Anvil Dwarf, so Future Jack is here to tell you how much he fucking hates artisan tools in D&D 5th edition. I think they're stupid, I think they suck, I think there's no redeeming them, and I think that they're drastically underutilized. I would much rather be a blacksmith in Skyrim than ever be a blacksmith in D&D 5th edition. I went through the trouble and process and just monotony of trying to come up with unique and cool things to do with each artisan tool to make them better for my players. From what I can tell, crafting and artisan tools in Pathfinder 2nd edition are significantly better and have more practical application than just, you can make a longsword, and you are better at history checks with long swords. Artisan tools are stupid, and I do not like them. But I think Pathfinder has the opportunity to rectify that for me. And that brings me joy and excitement, which means that this is a heritage that has a lot of potential, or could potentially be the worst one, except Oathkeeper. But we're not there yet, so Warden Dwarf. Your ancestors have been tomb guardians for generations, and the power they cultivated to ward off necromancy has passed on to you. If you roll a success on a saving throw against a necromancy effect, you get a critical success instead. This one's just neato. If Pathfinder clerics are anything like D&D clerics, then this is a really good sort of cohesive mix-up for a cleric dwarf. It's also really cool flair for a necromancer dwarf, or just cool flair for storytelling in general. You start to see this a little bit more with some of the races that have been added to D&D more recently, but there is just something so cool and flavorful about a Warden Dwarf, especially in the flavor text. Elemental Heart Dwarf. You can exude a burst of energy. Choose one of the following damage types: acid, cold, electricity, or fire. Once chosen, this cannot be changed. You gain the Energy Emanation activity. Energy Emanation. Frequency once per day. Energy bursts forth from your body. You deal 1d6 damage of your chosen type to all adjacent creatures. Basic reflex save using your class DC or spell DC, whichever is higher. At 3rd level and every 2 levels thereafter, this damage becomes 1d6. This reminds me a lot of the races in D&D that get spells over the course of like the first 5 levels. This is way better. I like this so much more. What you get with this class is basically the Thunderwave spell from 5th edition. But what makes it so much better is that it scales, which I think I would prefer over 5e's simplicity in this regard. 5e is just kind of like, hey, you're level 1 and that's cool. Here's a 1st level spell. Hey, Whoa, dude, you made it to level 3 and you didn't die? Congratulations. 2nd level spell. That's it. That's the end. Congrats. You made it. Fuck off. Leave. We're done here. We're done. There's no more. Go. Get the fuck out. We're not there yet, but I know that there is a feature that enhances the way that this scales to a greater degree. And I love the symbiotic nature that the feats have with the heritages that is just purely lacking from 5th edition. Forge Dwarf, you have remarkable adaptation to hot environments from ancestors who inhabited blazing deserts or volcanic chambers beneath the earth. This grants you fire resistance equal to half your level, minimum 1, and your environmental heat effects as if they were 1 step less extreme. Incredible heat becomes extreme heat becomes severe, and so on. So I don't really understand how resistance works, but my D&D brain is telling me a few things. Resistance in Pathfinder works more like deflect missiles, where you're just subtracting a static number as opposed to having damage. So in this instance, a level 4 dwarf subtracts 2 fire damage whenever they take fire damage. If this is the case, I'm sure it works out fine. I've seen all of your comments praising how well the balance is within Pathfinder, and I know I'm coming at it from a very simplified D&D perspective, but there's something about taking half damage versus subtracting 2 damage that is just all the more powerful to me as someone looking through the window. There's a feat in 5th edition called Heavy Armor Master. I think it's the worst feat in the entire game. It's a strength buff, which, hey, that's cool. It gives you -3 to bludgeoning, piercing, and slashing damage. It's basically like the babiest of baby rages. I think it's so dumb. I don't know how it can be improved. I do know that I think feats are drastically underutilized in 5th edition, and if you ever hit level 4, 8, 12, whatever, taking this is a hard fucking sell. And on top of that, feats are optional in 5th edition, so like, how the fuck are you ever supposed to like officially get one? Look, if you're a DM in 5th edition and you're somehow here, give feats to your players. Stop making them need to choose between an ASI and a feat at level 4, whatever, blah, 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 blah. Just give them feats. Hand out feats like fucking candy, especially when some of them are as shitty as you just take 3 less damage and you get +1 to your strength. It's not gonna break your game. It's gonna make your player feel cool about their heavy armor being just that much better, a little bit better. That's cool. That's really great. Do it more. Do me a favor and do it more. Okay, that's it, the end. Except it's not the end. We still have more to talk about in this specific. I think resistance is gonna stack. I imagine that there will be multiple things that give you resistance to fire, so if you're a level 4 dwarf, you have 2 resistance to fire. Maybe you got some armor that also gives you resistance to fire, and so now every time you take fire damage, you're subtracting 4 instead of 2. And there's probably more things that do this, so eventually it gets to the point to where you're really good at just being resistant to fire damage, but I think half is just simple. It's smart. Like D&D brain is really piping in here with the simplicity of just reduce it in half. I'm also not sure if there will be vulnerabilities. And if there are, I imagine it'll work a lot in the same way, where you're vulnerable 3 to fire. So every time you take fire damage, you just take an additional 3 as opposed to double damage. I'm curious to see how resistance works, but I'm sure it works just fine. Additionally, the environmental heat effects seem really cool. I don't know what they entail, and I know that 5th edition has sort of an underutilized version of these things, but the specifics of Pathfinder make me far more interested in seeing just environmental effects and how they play out in general. Oathkeeper Dwarf. Growing up, you never tried to lie to get what you wanted, and even when necessary, lying makes you uncomfortable. You gain a +1 circumstance bonus to perception checks to sense motive and to perception DCs against attempts to lie to you. Furthermore, you gain a +2 circumstance bonus to diplomacy checks to convince others you speak the truth when you were telling the truth. And you take a -4 circumstance penalty to lie and to your deception DC against sense motive. Of all of the heritages I've read so far, this is by far the fucking silliest. All of the previous ones seem to be like this realistic heritage and upbringing, almost biological to a certain degree. But this one is just, lying is bad, don't lie. It's just so dumb. I also enjoy that it's basically like, hey, you're pretty good at telling the truth. You're pretty good at telling when people are lying to you, but you're fucking abysmal at lying yourself. All in all, I like the mechanical flavoring of it. I'm very much a player who enjoys charismatic characters, and this seems like it sort of meshes really well with that archetype for me. I'm also not sure how Paladin equates to anything in 5e, but Oathkeeper seems like a great heritage for a Paladin in Pathfinder. This one feels laughably put together. Rock Dwarf. Your ancestors lived and worked among the great ancient stones of the mountains or the depths of the earth. This makes you solid as a rock when you plant your feet. You gain a +2 circumstance bonus to your fortitude or reflex DC against attempts to shove or trip you. This bonus also applies to saving throws against spells or effects that attempt to knock you prone. In addition, any effect that would force you to move 10 feet or more, you are moved only half the distance. I gotta keep shit talking Oathkeeper. I'm sorry, I have to. It's just, like, you read this description.
Your ancestors lived and worked among the great ancient stones.
But Oathkeeper is just like Bobby Boucher's mom from Waterboy. My mama said that lying makes your tongue fall off and it doesn't come back until you eat your favorite meal so that you can't taste it as a punishment. And that's my whole heritage. Haha. This is so fucking dumb. It's so stupid. Why? Anyway, this is just the weeble wobble of heritages. Weebles wobble, but they don't fall down. Strong-blooded dwarf. Your blood runs hearty and strong, and you can shake off toxins. You gain poison resistance equal to half your level, minimum 1, and each of your successful saving throws against a poison affliction reduces its stage by 2 or by 1 for a virulent poison. Each critical success against ongoing poison reduces its stage by 3 or by 2 for a virulent poison. I feel the same way I do about Forge. I'm still not entirely sure how resistance works, but I still feel that it works the way that I think that it works. But the way that poison is described has me confused and curious. I think it could work out in a number of different ways. Maybe it works like Darkest Dungeon, for example. Like you apply poison, and they just take 5 poison, and then 4 poison on their next turn, and then 3 poison on the turn after that, so on and so forth. Or maybe it works like the poison condition in 5e, where you're poison 5, and then you're just poisoned for 5 days, and whatever poison does just persists for that long. I don't know how it works, I don't know what it does, but I don't know, I'm confused. I'm very curious as well. What is virulent? I don't even fucking know. I imagine it means potent? Extremely severe or harmful in its effects. I was right, it just means potent. I don't know what it does, I don't know how it does, but I'm interested and curious, and I like it probably already before I even know. And that's it! That's the Dwarven mechanics and the Dwarven heritages. I was going to try and put some feats in this episode as well, but when I filtered the core rulebook and the character guide, just the level 1 feats in and of themselves looked like they could have fit an entire video, and I want to try and get my videos to be a little shorter. I don't need them passing the 30-minute mark. Nobody wants to watch a 30-minute video about some schmuck that's never played Pathfinder talk about Pathfinder. So yeah, the next video will be on Dwarven feats. So far, I really like dwarves. I think that they're very interesting, and that's it. That's the end. We're done. Now, you're still here though, so maybe click one of these videos. I don't know where the fuck they are. I don't know what they're doing. Click my face, subscribe, do a barrel roll. I don't fucking care. Hi, goodbye. Okay, bye.